The Credential Vault is a place on the control room where you can store bits of data that you want to keep secure. This includes usernames, passwords, server IP addresses, and much more. Keeping the credentials secure is one thing, but quite another if you want to have your entire team to have access to them. And that's where the Credential Vault really shines. The Credential Vault administrator can create credential lockers and assign access to the credentials to any user or group of users. When a user has access to the credentials, they only have access to the credential name, not the secure value stored within. Additionally, as automations progress through the lifecycle management process, the values of the credentials can change. Most enterprise installations of intelligent automation have those three phases: development, testing, and production. If a user creates an automation in development that uses a credential, they'll be using the development credential. As the automation progresses through testing, the automation will be using the testing credentials, and same with production. All this happens without modifying the automation. Users can create their own private credentials. This allows the user to temporarily test an automation before the Credential Vault administrator makes a system-wide credential available. So how do we use credentials? Let's first make a private credential just for ourselves. By the way, I'm using the free Community Edition to show you this because it is a bit different in the Enterprise Edition of the software. So first, from the left side menu, let's select Manage, and then Credentials. Let's create a credential for our example. So let's click the plus sign in the upper right corner. And for the credential name, let's enter REST example. Now let's go down to the attribute section. This is where we can list the specific credentials along with their values. For the first attribute name, let's type in username. For the input, choose standard. I'm going to turn off the masked under security. And for the value of the username, I'm going to type in the word guest in all lowercase letters. Next, let's click on the next attribute name, and we'll enter in password. This will also be a standard credential, but we'll leave the security masking on. And for the value, type in the word login, all in lowercase letters. Now let's click the Create Credential button in the upper right corner of the screen. We've created our credential, but we can't use it quite yet. We need to put the credential into a credential locker so it'll be available. So let's click on Lockers up here in the upper left. Now let's click the plus sign in the upper right corner to create a locker. And for the locker name, we'll call this AAU. We can see our REST example here in the available credentials side. So let's tick the box in front of it and then click on the arrow that points over to the right to move that over to the selected credential side. Now let's click the Next button, and that moves us over to the Owners section. We can see that my username is over here in the selected side. Let's click Next. We can skip this Locker Manager section since we are the owner, so go ahead and click Next again. Same thing with the Locker Participants. Let's click Next once more. And then finally here, under Locker Consumers, you can see the available roles. This will allow us to assign the use of this credential to a group of people who are members of this group. So we'll go ahead and add this CE user over to our selected roles. Now finally, let's click our Create Locker in the upper right corner of the screen, and we now have our credential built. You can only use credentials in actions that support the Credential Vault, and not every action supports the Credential Vault. We're going to create an automation that uses a REST web service as an example, which does support the use of the Credential Vault. So I'm going to go over to my automation section and create a new automation. And I will call this REST Credential Vault Example. The first thing that I want to add here is a REST web service post method. The URI is listed in the video description. And we're going to change our authentication mode to basic. And this is where we can see that we have the option for our Credential Vault. Next to the username, let's click the Pick button. We'll choose our locker for AAU. We'll choose our credential for REST example. And we'll choose our attribute for username. And click Confirm. Notice it does not show us the value of that username. Let's do the same thing for the password. Select our AAU locker, REST example, and password, and click Confirm. Now that we have that set, let's scroll down to the very bottom, and we're going to assign the output using the multiple variables method. So go ahead and click on the Add Variable Mapping button. And the key will be body with a capital B. For the map to variable, let's click on Create Variable. And I'm going to modify the name to sBody, S for string, and create and select, then add. If you're not familiar, what REST web services really are doing here is we're sending information over to a remote server. In this case, we're only sending over a username and password. And then we'll get the response back here in the body, which we'll put into the sBody variable. Now I'm going to add a message box action to this. And for the enter the message to display, I'm going to click and select the sBody variable and insert it there. This way we'll be able to see the returned message from that remote web service. We do have a separate video on REST web services, so if you're interested in learning more about REST web services, check that out as well. Now let's run this automation to make sure that we get logged in successfully. And there we go. We got our message box with the message, "You are successfully logged in." So what did we learn here? Credentials can be created by the individual user for their own use or by the Credential Vault administrator, so users or group of users can have access to these credentials. Credentials are used by specifying the credential locker, the credential name, and the attribute. There are no easy ways to see the values contained within the attribute, but you can use them in your automation. Also, if you own the credential, you can see the values there. Credentials can change values as the automations go through their life cycle from development to testing to production. I hope this clears up how to use the Credential Vault. Thanks for watching, and go be great.